two Roman emperors went into battle. Only corpses came out. In the muddy swamps of Abritus, an entire Roman army was swallowed whole by chaos, betrayal, and a barbarian ambush. This wasn't just a defeat. It was a Roman nightmare that left the empire shaken to its core. Out of all the disasters in Roman history, this one is different, because both the emperor and his son were killed on the same day. They led their legions straight into a trap and never came back out. In this video, we'll break down everything: who they were fighting, what led to this disaster, and how one of the most powerful empires in history suffered a blow it never fully recovered from. Welcome to the 3rd century, a brutal time of invasions, rebellions, and emperors who didn't last long. By the year 251 AD, the Roman Empire wasn't standing tall anymore. It was shaking from the inside and bleeding from the outside. This was the time known as the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when the Roman Empire was breaking apart from every corner. For nearly 50 years straight, things had gone downhill. Emperors came and went like seasons. Some were murdered by their own soldiers, some killed in battle, and some just disappeared. It wasn't just one or two enemies either. From the east, the Sassanids were pushing hard. From the north, Germanic tribes like the Goths were raiding deeper and deeper into Roman land. Even inside the empire, local governors were grabbing power for themselves, declaring independence and forming their own mini-empires. The Roman army, which was once feared across the world, had become a source of instability. Soldiers weren't loyal to Rome anymore. They were loyal to whoever paid them more or promised to make them rich. And if an emperor couldn't deliver, his own troops would often kill him and pick someone else. In the middle of this chaos, a man named Gaius Messius Quintus Decius, simply known as Decius, rose to power. But he didn't win the throne by public support or even by Senate approval. No, he got it the hard way. In 249 AD, he was sent by the Emperor Philip the Arab to deal with a rebellion in the Balkans. But when his troops saw him as stronger than Philip, they simply declared Decius as emperor instead. A few months later, the two armies clashed near Verona in Italy, and Philip was killed. Just like that, Decius became the new emperor. But Decius had no time to celebrate. As soon as he took power, reports came in the Goths had crossed the Danube. Again. These weren't small raids this time. It was a full-scale invasion, burning towns, looting cities, and even threatening key provinces like Moesia and Thrace. So now, the man who had just become emperor by killing another Roman had to prove he could protect Rome from the barbarians at the gates. And that's where the road to Abritus really begins. The threat facing Rome wasn't new. The Goths had been attacking Roman lands on and off for years. But this time, it felt different. Instead of small raids or scattered groups, a massive army of Gothic warriors came storming across the Danube River, the northern border that separated Roman territory from barbarian lands. This wasn't just a quick hit and run. This was a full-blown invasion. And leading this invasion was a man named Cniva. He wasn't just any tribal chief. He had turned the Goths into a serious fighting force. Organized, mobile, and brutal. Not just warriors swinging swords, but a real army that knew how to fight the Romans. Once they crossed into the Balkans, they moved fast, hitting Roman towns, burning settlements, and carrying away everything they could grab: gold, supplies, livestock, and thousands of prisoners to sell as slaves. And then came the real shock. Cniva's forces marched on Philippopolis, one of the biggest cities in the region, today known as Plovdiv in Bulgaria. The Romans had a garrison there, a proper defense. But even that wasn't enough. The Goths surrounded the city, launched repeated assaults, and finally broke through. They captured it. For the Roman Empire, it was humiliating. A barbarian force had taken one of their proud cities, and the local Roman commander, Gallus, had failed to stop it. Word of the disaster spread fast. Panic started to rise. Everyone in the region now feared that this Gothic army could go even deeper, maybe even reach Greece or Italy next. That's when Emperor Decius made a choice. He wouldn't wait for more news of disaster. He would go north himself, lead the Roman army in person, and crush this threat before it got completely out of control. But what Decius didn't realize yet was that Cniva had more surprises coming, and this war was only getting started. The Roman Empire couldn't afford to sit back anymore. After losing Philippopolis and watching the Balkans get torn apart, Emperor Decius finally took charge himself. He gathered a full Roman army and began marching north. But this wasn't just any campaign. With him rode his own son, Herennius Etruscus, who had recently been declared co-emperor. This wasn't just a father-son trip. This was a message to the Roman people and to their enemies that the empire was still strong and ready to crush any threat that crossed its borders. Decius had one goal: find the Gothic army and force them out of Roman territory. He didn't want to negotiate. He didn't want to delay. He wanted victory, clean and clear. But it wasn't going to be easy. The Gothic king, Cniva, was no fool. Instead of standing and fighting head-on, he used mobility to his advantage. He broke his army into smaller groups, raided towns, took supplies, and kept slipping away into the countryside before the Romans could pin him down. He was dragging the Roman army deeper and deeper into unfamiliar land, forests, rivers, swampy trails, and hostile villages. Decius and his legions kept marching. They chased shadows, hearing stories from villagers about Gothic raids that had happened just a few days earlier, always a step behind. Every time they thought they had him cornered, Cniva vanished again. This wasn't a traditional battle. This was a long, exhausting hunt. And the longer it went on, the harder it got. The summer heat was burning the soldiers out. Armor became heavy, boots tore apart, food started running low, and water sources were unreliable. Some units got sick. Others deserted. The soldiers were tired, hungry, and unsure if the enemy would ever stand and fight. Morale dropped, but Decius refused to stop. He believed he could end this once and for all. He believed Roman discipline would outlast Gothic tricks. So he pushed forward. And finally, his chance came. Scouts reported that the Gothic army had stopped moving. They were camped near a marshy area, close to a place called Abritus, deep in what is now northeastern Bulgaria. To Decius, this was it. This was the moment he had waited for. After weeks of running and chasing, the Goths had stopped. Now they had nowhere to run. Decius ordered his army to move in. They prepared for battle. But what he didn't realize was that this was exactly what Cniva wanted. The swamps weren't just land. They were a trap. And the Roman army was walking straight into it. The Roman army walked straight into a trap. Emperor Decius had finally caught up with the Goths after chasing them for weeks through forests, rivers, and countryside. The Romans were tired, supplies were low, but they were still confident. They believed that if they could just force a proper battle, they'd crush the enemy once and for all. But the Gothic king Cniva had been one step ahead the entire time. He had carefully picked the battleground. It was near the city of Abritus, a low, swampy area filled with mud, marshes, and thick, wet ground. It wasn't flat. It wasn't clean. It was the worst kind of terrain for heavy Roman soldiers and cavalry. But that was the point. Cniva didn't want a fair fight. He wanted to trap them. He placed a small part of his army out in the open, just enough to look like a normal Gothic force. These men stood in front, visible, waiting to draw the Romans in. But the real danger was hidden. The rest of Cniva's army was tucked away behind the marshes, in the trees, and off to the sides, silent, waiting. Decius didn't see it. He ordered the Roman legions to move forward, march into the swamp, and attack. At first, things looked okay. The Roman front lines pushed the Goths back step by step. Spears clashed, swords swung, and Roman discipline held strong. It looked like they might win this one. But then, things changed. The deeper the soldiers moved into the marshes, the harder it got. The wet ground made it almost impossible to keep formation. Roman shields became heavy and slippery. Horses began to sink. Soldiers lost their footing in the mud. And that's when the Goths struck. Out of nowhere, from the sides, from behind, from inside the trees, thousands of Gothic warriors charged, screaming, slamming into the Romans from all directions. It was a total ambush. The Roman formation shattered. Officers yelled orders, but no one could hear them. Soldiers turned to fight in every direction. It was complete chaos. There was no line, no control, no way out. The marsh turned into a graveyard. Then came the worst blow of all. In the middle of the fighting, Emperor Decius' son, young Herennius Etruscus, was hit by an arrow. He fell to the ground, dead. Someone rushed to tell the emperor. And Decius, still standing in the mud with enemies closing in, is said to have replied with just one cold sentence: "Let no one mourn." The death of one soldier is not a big loss. He didn't stop. He kept fighting. He pushed forward deeper into the swamp with whatever men he had left. Soon, even he was gone. Nobody ever found his body. The Roman army was wiped out. Thousands were slaughtered in the mud and water. Those who survived fled in panic, throwing away their gear just to escape the marsh. And for the first time in Roman history, not one, but both emperors died in the same battle. Rome didn't just lose a battle that day. It lost a father and son, a full army, and its grip on the Danube frontier would never fully recover. The news of Emperor Decius' death shook the Roman world like a thunderclap. Just days earlier, he had marched out as the confident leader of a proud imperial army. Now, both he and his son were gone, swallowed by the mud, arrows, and chaos of the marshes near Abritus. The Roman soldiers who survived were scattered and in shock. Their legions were broken. Their morale was destroyed, and their leadership had vanished in the swamp. With no time to regroup, the remaining officers rushed to name a new emperor, and the choice they made surprised many. It was Trebonianus Gallus. Yes, the same commander who had failed to stop the Goths earlier, the one who had let Cniva escape after the siege of Novi. But at that moment, Rome had no better option. They needed someone, anyone, who could hold the empire together, even if only for a while. Gallus knew that another battle would crush what little remained of the Roman army. So instead of fighting, he sent envoys to Cniva and offered a deal, peace in exchange for safe passage. And more than that, the Goths were allowed to keep everything they had looted. All the gold, silver, weapons, and Roman prisoners, they could take it all and go home. It was a bitter pill to swallow. For many Romans, it felt like surrender. But Gallus wasn't trying to win. He was just trying to survive. Meanwhile, Cniva and his warriors returned north as heroes. They had just pulled off something no Gothic army had ever done before, not just defeating a Roman force, but wiping out an emperor and escaping with the spoils. This battle sent shockwaves through the empire. People in the cities panicked. Border regions were left vulnerable. Rome's enemies saw weakness and opportunity. The crisis of the 3rd century, which had already brought civil war, plagues, and inflation, had now reached a new low. An emperor had died in battle. The frontiers were open, and there was no end in sight. The victory at Abritus wasn't just a win for the Goths. It was a symbol that Rome, once the strongest power in the world, was starting to crack from the inside. The Battle of Abritus wasn't just a bad day for Rome. It showed how far the empire had already slipped into a mess, where nothing was stable anymore, not even the throne. 2 emperors, a father and son, marched in full confidence, thinking they could crush the problem with brute force. But instead, they were lured into a swamp, surrounded, and taken out like common soldiers. No fancy tactics, no final glory. Just mud, confusion, and death. This wasn't a dramatic siege or a grand last stand. It was a slow disaster, one that could have been avoided. The Romans thought they were still the strongest power around, but their army walked into a trap like amateurs. And when it was over, the enemy didn't just win. They left the battlefield untouched, with all the loot, all the prisoners, and the empire in total shock. In that moment, Rome wasn't just defeated, it was exposed. The crisis of the 3rd century wasn't some background problem anymore. It had now taken 2 emperors in a single blow. And what came next would only get worse. Because when the center collapses, even the strongest walls can't hold. If you want more real war stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and stay locked into Ottoman evolution.